just saying that Paul mentioned for Adam was created first because the worship of the goddess Diana was opposite, that woman was created first. And Paul was trying to hold up Jesus, and so that they would be saved during childbearing, even if they forsook the goddess worship of fertility. So that was a helpful explanation that I had gotten as to the source.
Okay, thank you. There are several things in the chat, David. Did you say we wanted to touch on them?
Why not? Unless there's somebody else in line.
I don't have anybody other than myself, but
Can you see the chat? Can everybody see the chat?
just go down to the bottom of chat. We can scroll through it.
Okay, here's the first one. Do you want to read it? Excuse me, Forrest, or do you want me to read it? Go ahead. This one's from Eduardo. Maybe
yeah, okay.
Before we get there, let me ask a question that Bud Racine would have asked. Were he here? He's driving on the road to Michigan, but he put this question on Facebook, and that is, one of the questions in the list that Nerida put up was, what can we do to help women stay within the church? And Bud Racine's question is, well, why should they stay? What's the point of staying? So why not just move on in light of all this? Now, he didn't say all of that I've elaborated on. His question was simply, why should they stay? And the rest was my addition to it. So Nerida or Francis or anybody, what would you answer to Bud if he were here?
Well, we do know that culturally Adventists have a really hard time leaving. And so if they're going to remain Christian and not meet that hurdle of changing their social group, I mean, it's such a silly question. We support all Christians, but we are Adventists. So why should we be Adventists? Because we believe in this truth in the majority.
Well, I can speak to that because I left the Adventist Church for 20 years because I was attending the Banning SDA church. And as I said, the local minister makes a difference. He was not for women being ordained. He asked me to have the prayer once, but I had to sit on the front row of the church. I couldn't come out with the elders. And then I just came up and gave my prayer and then sat back down. That was offensive. And eventually I said, what am I doing? How can I encourage people to be a part of this church when I'm treated like a second-class citizen? So I left for 20 years and I came back because one of Paul's students found him and said, come on back to Sabbath school at Loma Linda. There's different classes. You can find one you like. And so we started attending and I met Priscilla and she told me about AAW. I had no idea about it. And so that's where I found my passion now. And that's why I'm back.
I think in 2012 at the union session, one of the most powerful speeches was made by Pastor McMillan.
Cheryl.
Mrs. Well, there's two pastors McMillan at the church at that time, but the wife, and she said, what am I going to tell my daughter? What am I going to tell my daughter if we don't approve women's ordination? In the application or the indication is there's no room for me. So I think it's a very real question. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to be abused psychologically or otherwise, I guess you have to ask the question, is it worth it? But anyway, I thought that was a powerful question. And by the way, at the 2012 session, which I attended, I was a delegate, 79% of the delegates voted for women's ordination.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was more than I thought. So 79%, 21% no. So anyway, the Pacific Union anyway seems to be very strongly supporting of all genders, both genders being ordained. I do see a hand up now, Simona. Can I go to her now, David, or?
Sure, it's up to you.
All right, Simona.
Just a comment, I've been told several times, why don't I leave? And my answer is this, I'm not in the church because of the people. I am in the church because of God. And so if somebody has a problem with that, they can leave. But I'm not budging. And so we have the right to create the space for ourselves, to be treated as equals. And frankly, we are contributing to the church far more than male, because there are more of us. We are that infrastructure that makes the church going. And I think that we deserve to be represented at every level. It is high time that we have church ordination, women ordination in the church. It is high time that we have general conference leader who is female, and that we recognize the fact that women are carrying this church, have been carrying this church from the very beginning.
Okay.
Wow, that shows
you.
how words can be understood in more than one way. I am sure that Bud Racine did not mean to say, why don't you leave? That would be too reminiscent of something we discussed on a different week. I think that what he was wondering is why stay around and continue to be abused? I think there's a difference between saying, why don't you leave, and being asked, why do you stay? And I think, but if he were here, I think Bud would say, now that I look upon all the stresses and strains it is to be an Adventist woman, particularly an Adventist minister woman, maybe it's in the woman's interest to go to a more healing context. Dana, do you want to jump in on this?
Yes, because it's really reminiscent of another conversation, but I want to thank Simona for her answer. Her answer, the way I understood it, is I am not leaving because I am the church. So the next idea is, if I'm leaving, do I take the church with me? Who has the right over the church? Where does the identity of the church lays? In the male headship group or in the women's ordination supporters?
Yeah.
So with this, we can bring in the conversation about unity. How can we keep the unity and yet stay true to our experience of God and our understanding of God and our understanding of what it means to be an Adventist?
Right.
Nerida had her hand up. Did you want to respond to that, Nerida?
That's the clapping symbol. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I get them mixed up if I don't look closely. Okay.
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that Bud was not trying to encourage anybody to leave. I think he was saying, it's remarkable that you do stay in light of all of the stresses and strains. Now, all of us have to face this issue about staying or leaving at a number of different points. On the issue of women's ordination, for sure, but also on how we treat people who are gay or lesbian or transgender, and also about what we think about the age of the earth. I mean, there's any number of these issues that would be a deal breaker for a lot of us. But I think the way we resolve that is to recognize that from the very beginning, and this is one of the things that Steve Daly's book, successfully points out, I think, from the beginning, there has been a plurality in Adventism. And he points out, citing Bert Holoviak, that in the very earliest days, there were the traditionalists, and then there were the evangelicals, and then there were the liberals. And we can use different words for that, but those are the three options that were there. There are some Adventist congregations to which I would not go because it would be spiritually harmful for me to go. But there are other Adventist congregations to which I could go and be spiritually nourished. So I think we should keep in mind that Adventism is not one thing, and find the school of Adventism that makes the most sense to us.
Okay, thank you, David. And I concur with your evaluation of Bud's statement. He's supporting the Adventist Church. I think it was just kind of a rhetorical question he was asking in that regard. Eduardo, you've got your hand up. You've also got some obscure quote from Ellen White. Did you want to comment to that?
Well, you can tell that I am the dissenting voice. I remember reading Leviticus 12, when it says when a woman gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for a week. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks. And in Leviticus 27, the Lord said to Moses, tell the people they want to redeem a person. If it's a man, he's going to pay 30 shekels of the temple coin. If it's a woman, they're going to pay, I don't remember, 20 or 15, half of men's value. And then I see that Jesus became lower than angels. Animals are lower than humans. I mean, it's God's design. If we are lower than angels, who cares? We don't want to be higher than angels or equal with angels. It's God's design. And my last statement that I put there, I created, is that we should respect the decision of the church. That's my comment on this issue.
Okay, I want to jump on that one right now, Eduardo. And that is, I think that 1871 statement is way out of date. Ellen White herself was opposed to that statement later on, and the church moved on. So why we want to go back to 1871 to a statement that may have been true when the church was about 5,000 or 6,000 members, and they were all males at the General Conference head session. But we have got churches that are larger than the whole, individual congregations that are larger than the whole church was at that time. And as I said, I'm repeating myself here, but Ellen White categorically says later on that the General Conference is no longer the highest authority. So I don't know why we keep flogging that when we need to move away from it. I'm sorry. So anyway.
Forrest, let me answer.
No, you don't have, Eduardo, why did Ellen White say in other places that General Conference is no longer the highest authority?
Can I say something?
Yeah, you can, but answer that question first.
Okay. If you research all the quotes from her about the voice of God being the General Conference, you will find out that she's referring to the General Conference Committee. There is no doubt about it. There's plenty of evidence.
Well, I disagree.
But
okay?
she moved to the General Conference.
No.
I can send you the information.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
If we disagree, Forrest, you
disagree.
know that I am very friendly And if we disagree, I don't mind to disagree.
Okay, all right.
That's-
Well, could I jump in here too? And let's
There's no
see if
problem for me.
Nerida wants to say something and
Yeah.
Simona.
Simona.
And after everybody else has had a chance to say something, I'd like to come back to Eduardo's point, because he has pointed out that the First Testament is patriarchal. It is. And there's no sense denying that. Eduardo is right about that. The question is, what do we do with it now? Over to you,
Okay.
Forrest.
Yeah, okay, thank you, David. I think, Nerida, we've got you up first, then it's going to be Simona.
Yes, so I think that Eduardo's position is one that we see in Adventism. It was certainly presented particularly by Ingo Sorke, who wrote for Tosk, and has a diagram that says, you know, here's God, here's Adam, here's Satan, and here's Eve next to that, and that Eve's transgression is incalculable, and there is this component that we see in other documents in headship at Tosk that are making this call to say that I have to have power over my wife or Jesus can't come. And I simply want to say that these are positions that we firmly believe are particularly God and being associated with men and Satan being associated with women. This is not the Adventist church policy. This is against fundamental belief number 14. We have a church in which children born are not unequal. And yes, that's a change from the Old Testament and how things were done, but it's the church that we have, and it's based on the text that you read earlier, that in Christ we are one.
Simona, come to you, and then Dana will come to you.
So,
Simona?
you know, if we are going to pull out resources from the Old Testament, then we need to take the whole of it. We can't just say, well, you know, this is the part I like, and then the rest of it I don't like. So if we are going to talk about, you know, how women are less valuable, then, you know, this is the same book that is saying that people that priests who are wearing mixed fibers should be executed, and that children who are not you know, listening to their parents should be executed, and people who don't who work on Sabbath should be executed. And, you know, there is a whole list of things that people believed at the time and was in line with the society in which they lived. That was about 3,000 years ago. I would hope, sincerely, that as a human race, as a congregation of human beings created in the sight of God, in the image of God, that we have moved forward from that point. I mean, this
Thank
is
you.
21st century.
Yeah, thank you, Simona. Did Nerida or Francis, did you want to respond to that?
I just clap. Thank you.
Okay. Nerida, do you?
The same. I was
Okay. All right, good enough. All right. I will now go to Dana. Dana?
Yes, in the same line as
Oops. I think I
I
muted
lost
you by
your sound.
mistake, Dana. Yeah,
Oh, Dana's muted.
yeah,
Okay.
I accidentally muted her.
it's okay. Thank you.
Don't take it in offense, please.
I think I already proved that I'm not easily offended.
Oh, I have a power over you here.
Okay, so in the same line of thought that Simona presented, I want to go back to the Old Testament and point out that if we speak about monetary value of people, that is true that redeeming a newborn female was cheaper than redeeming a newborn male. But if we add the bride price, then by the end of the life of a woman, the woman would cost more than a man.
By the way, I have
If-
thought.
If
I
we
thought
really
had to
want to,
recon-
if we really want to do this, you know?
Yeah, I have actually considered when my kids were teenagers that maybe that deal about executing wayward kids might be brought back. But anyway, okay, I'm looking for, okay, Priscilla, you said, thanks, Dana. I'm looking around here. I don't have, should we go back to the chat again?
So I think that it's an important issue that the AAW is wrestling with, is to how much to engage in arguments about theology and how much to simply talk about women ministers. And you will see that in my talk, I chose to talk about women ministers and culture and not to engage the argument. In my opinion, if you read the task documents that are pro-headship, particularly, I have a picture of one I can show you. Here's the one by Ingo Sorke, but this one is worse. In the document talking about the simple reading of the Bible, this statement is made: biblical slavery was not racist, but respectable indenturement. Even of Gentiles, there was a limit set by the Jubilee. However, they go on to be correct and say that the race of Gibeonites was exempt from that. And it was because of their attack on Israel. And their statement says, verbatim, slavery was practiced in the Hebrew economy, is not to be condemned. Many would benefit by indenturing themselves today. Now, most of you and I think that this condemns the argument of this side and that we should publish this and that that's the end of it. Now, they do go on to say that owning somebody is not acceptable, but somehow owning their right to work and controlling their behavior in the future is something that's perfectly acceptable to them, rather than mess around with actually paying people adequate wages and helping the poor in other ways. We should just have a simple reading of the Bible. So in some ways, I would argue, well, let's just post this, you know, because everybody is going to read this and say, this is intolerable, this is not Adventism, it can't be supported. But, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic where information is being manipulated and presented and argued and saying, this is my statement of Ellen White. Well, you're wrong because this is my statement. And no, she changed her mind. And yes, she said she got a vaccine, but no, she was lying about it. She just said vaccines were good, but she didn't actually get it herself. Oh my goodness, I cannot comprehend how information is being manipulated and abused. It is just beyond me. And so for myself, I have chosen to simply tell the stories of women in ministry and say that the theologians have to deal with the rest. And, you know, this is the quandary that we face.
Thank you again, Nerida. Priscilla, you had a statement up there from, did you want to respond to that or expand that a little bit, Priscilla?
I just wondered why it is difficult for us to recognize this as discrimination. This book that has been written called The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr, she traces the history of the Christian church through the early centuries and now, and the fact that slavery and women being under the
I lost you. Did I lose you, Priscilla? I guess we,
I'm having trouble with keep getting.
okay, I'll just go to, what, you, Nerida or Francis, you want to respond to those statements? No. I'll go to Heidi Olson Campbell.
So I found the comment.
Just a minute, Heidi, I've got Priscilla back. Hold on. Priscilla, you're back. Oh, she's... Okay, Heidi, I'm gonna come back to you now.
Okay, I was just going to comment. I was surprised by Inga Thorpe's comment, and there have been a lot of comments throughout history about the status of Adam and Eve and whether Adam or Eve had the greater blame. In fact, in the Agrippa von Netzsheim, I'm going to murder his name anyways, back in the early 16th century, wrote a piece called "Of the Nobility and Excellence of Womankind" that actually argues that Eve was superior to Adam. And this is one of the great debates that's occurred throughout time, but a lot of us don't recognize how far back women have been defending their right to be authority. Oh, I'm sorry, I muted myself somehow. Sorry about that. So women have been defending themselves for a long time anyways, and some men have been defending women for a long time, way back 500 years ago. For the right to have speech and authority in church. And so this is a debate that unfortunately has been raging for hundreds of years, but that many women throughout time have found a way to participate and be active in church.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Priscilla or Nerida, any comments?
Two things. I think one, the very, very early church has evidence of having women bishops and women giving communion. And that's coming to light and was squelched at about 300 AD. And so I think that that's important. It has raged for a long time, and generations and centuries have answered the question differently. The other thing that I find, even in the Old Testament, as a physician, when you hear the stories of births, particularly of Tamar's children, of Jacob and Esau being born, there are details in those stories that only the midwives knew were important. And the midwives had enough power to make sure that the men put that information in the Bible. So there are powerful women everywhere. We haven't always been blessed with respect, but there have always been men in leadership who recognize the power and knowledge of unique to women.
Okay. You know, I'd like to ask you a question, Nerida. You just brought up the early centuries of the church. How do you explain the stories of Thecla if the early church didn't respect women highly? Any comments on that?
I am not a church historian. I am a pediatrician. I can tell you why Jacob and Esau were identical twins from the story in the Bible, but I can't tell you much about the history of the early church.
Well, the reason I asked is Thecla was big stories in the early Christian church. I'm not sure 2nd or 3rd century, but anyway. McKinley, we're coming to you.
Thank you, Forrest. And thank you, Nerida and Francis, for your presentation. I was edified. You shared a lot of new information, or at least reviewed other information that needed to be reinforced. I think the presentation showed that there is great contribution that women are making to the ministry in the Adventist Church, and how much more women can contribute to the ministry. My thinking on this topic is informed by, I don't have my Bible with me, but it's either in Matthew 9 or 13 or thereabouts, where the Lord says that the harvest is truly plentiful, but the laborers are few. And I tend to frame that as the harvest worker mandate. And I often ask the question, how can a healthy church with a lot of opportunities not draw on the talent of our women leaders? Now, one idea that Frances talked about during her presentation was the example of, I think it's the WOW women, the Jewish women. They are taking or have taken one different approach to their effort. I think Francis said that they wrote a letter of forgiveness or asking for forgiveness of how they might have approached this in the past. And I just wonder if Adventist women were to take that approach, what might it look like and what might be the result or outcome?
Yeah. So there's been quite a bit of discussion between us. So initially, when you think of let's forgive, let's offer our forgiveness, we want to give backhanded slams. We want to say, well, I forgive you for not recognizing Sandy Roberts in the yearbook, and I forgive you for, and that really isn't the spirit of forgiveness, is it? And so we've struggled to try to come up with a way to, yes, there are things that I have done. When I was told by a GC person that they could not work with us because of our stance on women's ordination, I immediately said, this is true, and I assign blame to this person. And that's not fair. I didn't vet the comment. I didn't give the person the benefit of the doubt. And I do think that I have escalated on my end. You can see I'm a fiery person. I can escalate well. I can agitate. And not always have my comments and actions been the most Christ-like.
By the way, I do like your term advocate much rather than agitate. I'm sorry that Mr. Trim has used that term. He should know better. So anyway.
Thank you, Nerida, for your comment. I think I appreciate this. I think I remember my mother was the first elder ordained in our local church. And so I can appreciate the considerations and interest in making sure that there is greater opportunity for our women sisters in ministry. Women are extremely talented. I think we men sometimes fail to recognize that, but I've had the privilege of working with some very, very powerful women whose insights I think put some men to shame. So the church does itself hurt by not drawing on this talent pool.
Thank you, McKinley. Any comments, Nerida or Francis?
Yes, I appreciate what the gentleman just said. And I forgot to bring out when I was talking two things, but I want this conversation, if possible, to go to what's next for us, what's next for Adventists. And when I told about the German ladies posting their 7 points on the churches, the cathedrals there in Germany, I meant to ask, can we do something similar? But we don't want to, we've always tried to keep unity in the church as far as the AAW. We've tried not to make a split over this issue. So if we were to do that, what would that cause? Where would we put it? When would we put it? Because these women actually put these signs on the doors the week before they were the bishops were going to meet for their spring session. So they deliberately put it there then. And the other thing that I left out was about the Mormon women. A group of them went to Palmyra, New York, to the Sacred Grove, where supposedly Joseph Bates met the angel Moroni. And they had planned in advance, and they told any women or men that you can't come but would like to write a letter, send that letter to us. And they read all of those about what their wish was for women in the ministry of the LDS Church. And wow, it sounded just like some of those letters were just like things we would write. So, as far as the future, could we go someplace, like maybe to a place of our woman founder? What kind of reaction would we have? We just want to keep this before the people, and we want to encourage women and women's ordination as much as we can. We're looking to you for input and ideas.
Okay. David, before I call on Dana again, what is our time frame today? Are we going to do 12:30 or? Did I lose David?
He's muted.
Oh, you're muted, David.
Thank you. It's 12:30 now, and I think we should thank our presenters, and they may need to leave, and that's fine, but I'll leave this on so people can continue the discussion. I think if they want to, I think Francis's question about what to do next is very important. I also want to applaud what Nerida was saying about maybe not spending any more time on arguing about biblical texts, but showing the effectiveness of women ministers. I think that's the best way forward right now. After all, that's what Peter did when he went to the Jerusalem Council. He did not say to all of them, well, here are all the texts I have that show we should be inclusive of all people, even the Gentiles. No, he told them a story about how the Gentiles had responded favorably to Jesus Christ and how they were being effective in their context. So it was not a text that convinced them. It was a story that convinced them. And I think that that's probably the next right step to go. I see Dana has her hand up.
Yes, she does. Yes, go ahead, Dana.
Thank you. I have two ideas before we close this. One is about history. I think if we want the history to inform us and inform our decisions, we need to treat history with honesty and humility. How do we do that? We need to know all the stories and tell all the stories about women that were involved in ministry before 300 AD and since 1800. And then we have to remember that the core value of this church, the essence of this church, is the idea of present truth, which means that the truth is continuously evolving, that we receive more light and more understanding and more discovery from God and more revelation. So we need to be open to that, not to be stuck in whatever happened in 1844 or before or a little after that.
Okay.
That's one statement that I really wanted to make.
Okay.
And the second one is that we have to, always and continuously be aware that there is, when we talk about women's ordination, we have the issue of calling and we have an issue of rights. I personally am a chaplain, which, it's a type of ministry. I don't want to be a chaplain because it's my right to be a chaplain. I want to be a chaplain because I am called by God and because God, is doing something through me for the world. I strive to make somebody's life a little better, to acknowledge God's presence in somebody's life at the most difficult moments of their life. So being a woman minister, it's because of calling, because of what Nerida said, that unquestionable evidence that the Holy Spirit is working through that person. But we also have the issue of rights, which is about equal pay. It's about other things that we can talk about. So thank you so much. That's what I wanted to mention.
Thank you. Thank you. I see, Francis. And it is 12. I would like to say one last thing because I'm going to have to go. But last 2 weeks ago, when I was at the session, I think we need to remember that at least in the Pacific Union, we now have an executive secretary of the Pacific Union, who is Elder Sandy Roberts. And she has, I actually told her ahead of time I wasn't going to vote for her because I didn't want her to leave the Southeastern California Conference. But anyway, she got an overwhelming vote to be executive secretary. Elder Ricardo Graham spoke. He's retired, I should say. I think if you ever get a chance to send Elder Ricardo Graham a note of thanks, because he has taken a lot of grief for supporting women's ordination. So, I mean, personal grief from people that were his friends. So anyway, I think the Pacific Union is moving forward. I guess our biggest danger is that we won't think of our colleagues in other fields as well. So the battle's not as far from over. So thank you, Nerida and Francis. And I'm going to say goodbye at this time, David, and I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, here's the benediction, and people are welcome to stay by as long as they want after the benediction. But this will give our presenters an opportunity to leave if they need to do so. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Well, Nerida, Kinley here. I have another question before you or Francis run off. So the three things that you mentioned in your presentation that I guess advocate or advance the cause of women's ordination. One of them was in times of stress. I think the other one was opportunity, and I think the third one may have been exposure. What is the organization doing to increase the exposure and the successes or the blessings of women currently in the ministry as examples of their contribution to the church broadly, and as models that can inform people who might still be struggling with this idea?
So we're active on a few fronts. My emphasis has been to tell the story. So when we heard that there was a woman who was a pastor in Peru in the 70s, we went and found her and gave her the Woman of the Year award. This created a sense of being seen and a sense of, you know, for us in North America, we don't realize anymore what a risk these women are taking in other countries. And so we see our role to see and recognize, to tell the stories of women so that it's apparent, because it is my belief that it's inevitable that women will be recognized as ministers, whether everybody is not ordained or whether all are ordained. It doesn't matter to me, but women will be equally recognized as ministers in the church. I'm an optimist, that's true, but I think it's inevitable when I look at what is happening and how change is occurring everywhere. And so our job is to show that. We've also been asked to supply documentation, so we've been translating into Spanish. We'll have information. We're working with Russians and Romanian, Korean, Anybody else who speaks another language would like to translate for us. Giving information is important. And this is the theological summary of position 2 from the TOSC document, which is a short 30 pages on a biblical review of women in ministry. And then I think the other thing is, outside of our organization, we should be spending our money with team and giving scholarships to women to study. That's where my feeling is. Now, there's certainly a case to be made for having a statement, whether it's a 28 fundamental beliefs or thesis, 95 theses that we put on a door somewhere. But my emphasis is on telling the story and representing for those people.
I'm trying to encourage.
Go ahead, Francis.
Yeah, I'm trying to encourage women everywhere, or trying to be in the ministry or are in the ministry. I was on Messenger with a young woman currently in Romania with her husband. She's an American who wanted to go into the ministry many years ago, but she looked at the climate and she said, I wouldn't be accepted. And so she didn't follow the calling, but God was not finished with her. So she is getting her degree so that she can be a minister, but she still is facing that roadblock. And it's disheartening to her. I hated to hear it.
Thanks for sharing that. So for everybody that's staying on here, this is typically a kind of a free for all. So if you want to chime in here, do chime in. Eduardo, I see your hand is up, but before I come to you, can I just go back to Francis and Nerida with another question? Again, if anybody else wants to chime in, please do so. So at the beginning of your presentation, Nerida, you showed the progress and the accomplishments of the organization. And I wonder if moving forward, there might be another big goal that you folks might incorporate, which is getting to a point where maybe the Adventist Church in general embraces women's ordination. I mean, it might not be something that happens over the next 20 years, 10 years or so, but if you might consider including that as a goal in your list of things, maybe that might inspire a new future.
Yes, so our mission has always been pro-ordination. It's always been for the recognition of women in all walks of life, church, community, and personal lives, to be recognized as equal for their contribution. We recognized Ricardo Graham as a champion of justice this year, and Dave Weigley and Pastor Jackson for their work with supporting women's ordination. And at the ceremony, just person after person in tears. I think we had all the men in tears at one stage. This has been hard work. It's been a challenge for them, and seeing the appreciation for being recognized was really touching. I think that there's power in that collective voice to say that we are a pro-women's ordination organization, and this is where we're going.
If I could just,
So, Simona, go ahead. Then I want to recognize Eduardo. But go ahead, Simona.
So, there is a statement that says women's work is never done. And I think there is some to that, in the way how the society is structured. We are expected to do things without being recognized or rewarded for our work. And I think that is something that needs to change. Historically speaking, there are two ways how things change in a society: through evolution and revolution. And I think we are putting too much emphasis on evolution in this fight. because, we are never going to win over people who are insecure, and who don't feel good about themselves unless they sit on somebody else's back, and that usually is a woman's back. So, there is a place where you have to say, okay, what do we stand for? Who are the people that we support? And we have situations where we have way too much domestic violence we don't talk about. We have, things that are happening within the walls of our churches, in our homes, that people don't talk about, so they don't rock the boat. And I say rock the boat, get those people off, because they don't belong if they are not willing to share the space with others in peace. If they are resorting to violence and crimes in order to support their position, they have no place in the church. Frankly, they don't have place in the society. And so I think that, we need to find a balance between both evolution and revolution, and use tools of both mechanisms to achieve the goals that we need to achieve. Because our church is, there is that text in the Old Testament that says that the people of God should be the head and not the tail. We are trailing the tail at this time. And that's not where I want to see our church going.
Thanks, Simona. Okay, Eduardo.
David, are you listening?
David is not here, Eduardo. So you just have those of us who remain to have a post-class chat.
For several years, I attend the annual council where the General Conference Committee meets for discussions. And I was attending that council for many years when the woman ordination was discussed. And I don't see any future for the cause. What I recommend you is to leave it up to the Lord, do your part. And if disappointment comes, you need to stay in God's hands because He is in control.
How do I do that when my daughter is not able to be a minister because of the prejudice? How am I supposed to keep her in the church? How am I supposed to keep quiet? I can't, Eduardo.
No, I don't mean.
We're going to have to learn to live together because I fail or not, I will fight for my children and stay in this church.
Let me pick up on what Nerida just said, because again, if you go back to that text that I mentioned, that I characterized as the harvest worker mandate, again, the Lord says in there, the harvest is truly plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, petition the Lord of the harvest that He send more workers. So the question is, as Nerida is saying, she has a daughter or another family has girls who want to go into the ministry because the Lord has placed on their heart this desire to serve. Why should the church place barriers in their path to pursue that passion or that calling? Wouldn't that be going against the Lord's mandate for more workers?
God said the rocks will cry out. And I think as it stands that the women are higher than rocks.
I want to bring out the text that says, do justice and have mercy and walk humbly with your God. This is a matter of do justice, and it's also a matter of having mercy and walking humbly. Walking humbly is a command that stands for everybody that wants to follow God. This includes people like us that try to serve the Lord. Thank you for for the video, Eduardo. So walk humbly includes me and Nerida, that serves as a doctor, but in the same time, takes care of people's heart, and that is part of her own ministry. But walk humbly applies also to the leaders at the highest level that cannot hold on to power just because of their headship understanding of theology.
Thanks, Dana. There's Linda has a hand up.
Yes, hi. I was part of the Southern California group back in the early 80s that was helping shape ideas for the beginning of the Association of Adventist Women. So it's very touching to hear this report. It's amazing to think the journey that the organization has been on, and I certainly wish to support you, even though I haven't been active that much since. One of the things that I was championing back in those first days was support of all women trying to make a contribution, all Adventist women trying to make a contribution to the world we live in. And I think the load for women in ministry was so needy that it sort of let that other thought set aside. But it's very interesting to me that there are Adventist women in leadership all over the world. And is there anything that we can learn from those journeys? My own journey was just amazing the way things came together. I got involved in a career that no Adventist had been in research administration, who even knew that existed. And one of the things that I without even purposefully thinking about it, was I've got to learn from the men. And I need to be a friend with the men who are where we're all journeying on the, we're all on the same journey. Well, asking those questions and aligning myself, I ended up being the president of an international organization at a time that was 90% men. That's an interesting thing to look at. And I'm sure there are stories all over the world of Adventist women accomplishing and becoming leaders. I don't know if there's enough energy to look to those women, having them communicate with one another. What can we learn from those journeys that will help women on this particular journey of going into ministry and leadership in our church? My final thought is, I love the phrase, don't rail against the darkness, but light a candle. And I'm very thankful that the association has found that place to light a candle, as tough as it is, and not just rail against the darkness. So thank you for everybody who's been out there making these things happen.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Linda. And I wonder, in some of the stories that you've come across, and maybe in your own experience as the women's organization highlights examples on their blog, whether your story could be one that they consider including. Francis, what do you think about that?
Oh, my personal story?
No, Linda's.
Oh, Linda's, yes, I think that would be awesome. Yes, it was a wonderful comment. And if we could touch base with other women like her that have been successful,
Right.
And I think that would be excellent. Thank you for that idea.
Okay, anybody else?
McKinley, I wanted to say that I don't want people to be quiet. I don't mean that.
Thank you, Eduardo, definitely. Okay, in the chat, Priscilla, yes, she still is on, says that the Pacific Union Recorder wants stories of women in the church. Francis, do you think the stories of women in the church is being told or are being told sufficiently?
Probably not. Probably not. There's probably other women that we could certainly interview that would be worthwhile. I would be open to knowing some names, and would I be willing to follow up on this?
There's your invitation group. If you've got a name of a woman with a story worth telling and sharing, perhaps you can reach out to Francis and Nerida. Let's see here. Imagine how happy. Can please see you. Elmo, we haven't heard from you. Are you still there? Do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I'm still here. My
Okay.
thoughts about this is, we talked about a topic last Saturday, and I would imagine the best way to move forward. It's nice to agitate men, because you will, no matter what, you'll make some gains. But I think the best way is to wait for a new generation of men leaders who will think differently. Just like I said last Saturday, it takes 3 generations to change a mental thought. So with this, you'll just have to wait and for a new generation who will be more liberal and understanding. You know.
I'm sorry, but that's not how the world works. We don't wait for change; we make it.
So, Simona, let me just expand on what Elmer just mentioned. So last week we were talking about a topic, and he shared what I believe was a very powerful insight. And his insight was that humanity as a species is afflicted by what I like to call inertia, right? And Elmer's observation was that humans tend to make change very slowly, and those changes sometimes occur over a number of generations. And I think his application here is that as Francis and Nerida and the members of the association are doing, is to not essentially waste any time, but keep doing what they're doing, and eventually there will be a change in the thinking, the attitudes, the knowledge of people to the point where this change happens. Now, Simona, to your point, I think it can be accelerated, by definitely prayer and some of the items that Nerida and Francis talked about. But I think the inertia of humanity is a big part of this challenge that our church and other organizations are facing with this problem.
I hear that, but how many thousands of generations did women have to wait until we got the right to vote? How many thousands of generations people were enslaved? How many thousands of generations because people were waiting for something? And the only time that things actually started to change, when you had people who agitated, I'm purposely using this word, who were agitating against the status quo, because that is what humanity wants. We want to stay the same. And that's true. I mean, what you say, that humanity is inert, it's true. But, humanity has changed, the society has changed because of the very few people who dared to stand up and say, no more status quo, we want a change. And so maybe without people who agitate, without people who come up and fight for what is right, for this change, there would never be a change. Because we as humanity have shown, we have had thousands and thousands of years of slavery. Nobody, was bothered by it, until people started talking about it and started fighting against it and started suffering and sacrificing for it. So the change that we want is a result of those few people who managed and who dared to stand up against status quo, against inertia, and fight for it.
And I think that's what the organization is doing. Now I see Dana has a hand up. Laura, forgive me for calling on you, but if you want to chime in here, you have a lot of good thoughts, please join. But go ahead, Dana. Okay.
Oh, is Laura going to speak now?
No, she's.
Oh, okay. So going back to the idea of waiting for 3 generations, and to what Simona said earlier, that change comes through evolution and revolution. I think the change that Elmer talked about is the evolutional change. And we have to recognize that sometimes we need revolutions. Simona and I come from the same part of the world, and we know that the communists changed not in 1 generation, but in 2 years or 3 years. The whole Eastern Europe was liberated from communism. We also know that slavery changed in 1 generation, Reformation changed the world in 1 generation, and so on. So, you know, that there are changes that we can wait for, and there are changes that we cannot wait for evolution to do its job. Because if you see a wrong, you have the moral duty to correct it.
Okay, so here's a question to you and Simona. How would you accelerate this change that the AAW and others are working on? I think a powerful example that they talked about was local pastors taking action, bringing about changes locally, and that's how some of this happened. So what other things would you say need to be done?
Well,
Yeah,
you know, I'm going to, sorry. You
Go
want to
ahead.
No,
go,
please,
Dana?
go ahead, go ahead.
You know, don't put your light under the bushel. Light it from the top of the hill. Let the people know, shout about it. You know, why are we hiding these things and putting it on a website instead of talking about it in everywhere we can? You know, you need to go to a website to find these things. And lots of people who are fighting to preserve the status quo are not going to this website. They don't care about it. They have their own websites that are filled with, you know, misquotes and lies and frankly, things that are so obsolete that, you know, even Smithsonian wouldn't take them. So it's, you know, it's one of those things that I think that women are supposed to be quiet. You know, if we talk loudly and we proudly about what we do, then we are boasting. When men do the same thing, then, you know, they're just talking about their accomplishments. Well, we need to break some, you know, glass ceilings, and we need to break some attitudes, frankly, and we need to speak out, and we need to show up, and we need to talk about it in public. We need to have action that is going to be visible, and not just, you know, somewhere that's, you know, from my point of view, way too subtle. You know, we are preaching to a choir. We have a group of people who have the same goal, the same attitudes, and we talk among ourselves. Yeah, well, we need to talk to, you know, other people who are maybe supporters, but they're not aware that there's something is going on. So there needs to be a little bit more visibility to all of this. That would be my first suggestion.
McKinley, let me give my sense.
Go ahead, Elma.
There are a number of reasons why there are a number of reasons that underlie our behaviors. Okay, if it's just a matter of change of a difference of opinion, you could engage in a conversation, and whoever is more compelling can change the other opinion. But if you look at our leaders, no matter how much good points you give them, they just won't change. So you wonder what makes people behave like this. And I would assert that part of this hesitancy is a personality trait, not a difference of opinion. And you don't change personality traits by just giving them text and, you know, in Genesis 1:1 or Revelation or whatever. You know, you don't change personality by giving them compelling reasons. You just have to wait for them to change. I mean, it's just one of those things. I see that in my practice. I mean, you see couples who cannot get together, and they enjoy not getting together. They enjoy just fighting with each other. It's just part of their personality. You accept those things. So we have a joint conference president here who everyone knows doesn't think too highly of female. And let me give you an opinion. I fully support the work of the AAW. I'm not trying to stifle them. I'm just telling them that there are some things that are intractable. You'll just have to wait. We have to vote leaders who have different opinions with how to run an organization. I think that's my point.
I don't totally disagree with you when we talk about behavior. I just don't want to take your comment as a sentence, as a life sentence. I want to believe. I choose hope over the reality of your comment. I agree that some people might not change, even if they would live 3 generations from now on. But I hope that change would come a different way, because we have elections in this country and in this church. And I also hope that, because women are majority, more women would enter ministry, more women would serve the church, more women would accept women ordination. Because let's face it, not all women accept women's ordination. And it's not, we don't really want to have a deep psychological conversation right now based on research about how change comes in human behavior. We want to choose hope, and we want to choose to be. Somebody asked, why don't we do more? I think this is the place where we have to balance being humble and being wise as serpents. We try to do as much as we can. And if you paid attention to Nerida's presentation, we are already blacklisted at the General Conference level. We are not given information on official channels, and so on.
See, that should give you an idea that people there who blackmail you are going against what we believe, that this is a personality trait. They don't like you. It doesn't matter what the Bible says. It doesn't matter what the consensus is. We don't want you. We'll blackmail you.
I understand that, but that's why, my next question was for Eduardo. I wanted to ask Eduardo, what makes him personally be against women's ordination, if he can share this with us. And I promise I have the utmost respect for your courage to engage in this conversation. That might be as uncomfortable for you as it is for us.
Before Eduardo answers, I want to hold that question in the bin for a moment, and if I may, and just recognize as an example of this personality trait in the inertia of humanity that we referred to earlier, with the comment that John Ney placed in the chat. He says, slavery did not change in one generation. It took a long time, I think 80 plus years. And he mentions that the change that happened finally in Brazil was much later, and as a result of a lot of decades of agitation. So that is a sort of a realistic example of how something that most people believe, thank you, I see Linda's hand, thanks Bernie, but believed to be very wrong, but took a very long time to resolve. And in some quarters of the world, it's still with us. So
even here,
yeah. So
You go
the-
to LA, you have slaves in LA. You have sex slaves everywhere. You have slaves in the clothing industry.
right, and so you're underlying
In
the
United
point.
States, we are not talking about some remote African country where children are working as slaves to mine diamonds. We are talking about LA.
Right. So you're underlining the point that both Elmer is making, and I think John is also suggesting that, again, these very difficult societal and organizational issues take a long time to fix. But Nerida in her presentation talked about that East St. Louis Baptist Church that for over 157 years was led by male pastors. And it wasn't until a gentleman who had the example of his female family members leading out in ministry that came and told the people, our sisters can do the same work that you see your male members doing. And it was his particular effort that led to that change. And so at the GC level, it's possible that the change being sought on this topic might not happen until somebody who has a deeper awareness and conviction of the need for this change assumes that role. And how long is that going to take? Okay, Eduardo, do you want to
Say something.
answer? Yeah, do you want to comment on Dana's question to you? And then after that, I want to go to Linda.
Dana, I was present at the annual council, and the 13 divisions submit their study on woman ordination. And one of the presenters mentioned that it will be several feet high, a pile of document about the issue. So, like Elmer said, it needs to be practical. The argument for and against women has been presented. And by my own conscience, I go by what I know from the Bible and spirit of prophecy, which I have no time to tell you because he will.
That is what I asked for. I asked for a personal account, short account of what it is in your life, in your story, in your beliefs that prompts you to have this position. And I do this with the most sincere heart to understand.
I will not do fair justice to the issue if I say something shortly, because it's bigger than a few comments. The other reason that I stay against woman ordination is because I respect the organization, and I don't think that any business organization will tolerate dissenters in their orders. Imagine a soldier going against the general, or any business person going against the organization. I don't think they will tolerate something against their policy. I mean, we are in a free organization, conscience organization. I mean, you have all the right to speak, but being practical, I don't see any future. I mean, don't keep quiet. But sorry for not answering your question about my personal. I have one, but I don't feel capable of doing it in 2 or 3 minutes.
Thanks,
So
Eduardo.
maybe later.
Thank you. And I think it probably wouldn't be beneficial right now to go into that, and we don't want to reduce the conversation between two people. So will you accept
No,
that, Dana?
it's not, I don't see this as reducing the conversation. I was under the impression that Eduardo holds this belief and he has the courage to speak. And we do many types of research when we do research, and one of them is, the qualitative research when we do interviews. So I was trying to replicate that just in few minutes to understand the core reasons that Eduardo has for his position. Regarding to his remark about no organization would tolerate dissenters, I would say yes, the Catholic Church did not tolerate Luther, but the whole world benefited from Reformation.
Thank you. Okay, Linda, can I come to you?
Sure.
Go
Yes.
ahead, please. Thanks, Dana and Eduardo. Go ahead, Linda.
Oh, I was done.
Oh, you're done? Your hand is still up. That's why, I guess.
No, she's done.
Put my
Okay.
hand down.
Okay. Well, let's see here. I'm looking at the
McKinley, I'm leaving. I love you guys very much.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing, and have a good Sabbath.
Before we all leave, maybe somebody can say a prayer, please. Can you please pray, McKinley? If there is
pray.
nobody else that wants to comment.
All right. Any last comment or thought before I pray and we close it out? All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for the blessing of your Sabbath, the blessing of technology that makes this digital fellowship possible. We thank you for the thoughts and comments that have been shared on this topic that is pressing on many people's hearts. We know that there are strong feelings on the topic, but dear Jesus, we know that you have you see no difference between men and women, and you see that we can all make contributions to your work in preparing hearts for when you come back. So bless us with love and grace and fellowship to be able to contribute where we can, to encourage others where we can, to be a blessing where we can. Bless each person now as they go out and face the world and all these challenges. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Hey,
Okay.
Linda, Linda, before
Thank you.